Hi everybody, I am here today to share with you my 5 favorite stitches that I use in my art. And they are the stitches I go back to over and over again. There are other stitches I enjoy doing, but these 5, they're kind of like my core. They set the pace for my work, starting with my French knots, which many of you know already that I absolutely love, and then go on to help me create texture of different levels, of different sizes, using different fibers, and just fun. I mean, these 5 are the ones I use over and over again because I enjoy doing them. If there are stitches that you don't enjoy doing, you don't have to use them. There is not a place, at least that I know of, called the embroidery police. They are not going to come tap you on the shoulder and say, "Oh, Susan, you did not use whatever that stitch is." There are a whole lot that I don't use because I fumble them all the time, or they frustrate me all the time, and so I don't take the time to practice to get better at it. So don't feel just because these are my 5 favorite stitches for using in texture and mossy foresty kind of things, or in my white pieces, it doesn't mean you have to use them. Maybe you like 3 of my 5 and the others you're like, no way. Anyway, let me turn the cameras around. I will talk you through some demos. Now remember, when I am demoing something, I am pretty much self-taught. Self-taught means looking things up in books, watching YouTube videos, asking a friend, "Hey, can you help me figure this out?" It does not mean that I went to the Royal School of Needlework. So if you want perfect stitch instruction, you're going to have to go find another channel, and that's okay. No hard feelings here. This is Susan's way, the way a recovering perfectionist learns how to make the stitches she needs for her art and have a good time doing it. Okay, the first stitch I want to start with is French knots. When I first came back to embroidery after many, many years away, I mean, I'm talking like 45, 50 years away, the French knot was one of the only stitches I remembered without having to go look it up in a book. And that felt like a little spark of something, kind of like a seed. And that connected me back to my garden, which is sort of the direction I was trying to go with my embroidery, to bring nature into stitch. And so the French knots, every one of them makes me think of a seed as I'm doing it. And I realize that even if I cover them up, I need to do some French knots to kind of get started on a project. It just sort of gets my brain going. And, you know, it's like if you were a painter, you would do that underpainting. It kind of sets up the energy for me. So let me show you first some French knots. Okay, so here are French knots, and here are some more French knots. And what I discovered is that when I was stitching on the flat, like I was in an embroidery hoop, I could put some little stuffing underneath it and puff them up, and I would get these little hills. And French knots are awesome for being able to sculpt hills. And really, a French knot does not have to be difficult. It's only difficult if you are looking for perfection. And remember, I am a recovering perfectionist, so no perfection here. Now, before somebody asks, I am stitching with a yarn, and it is fingering weight, and I like this. It runs nicely through most of my fabrics and my needles, and I am using a size 18 chenille needle. Now, I might normally use something a little smaller, but because I couldn't find the container to show you, I stuck with an 18. You bring your threads up. Now, you can do this stitch with anything from a single strand of embroidery floss up to bulky pencil roving if you want. It just has to be something that your needle and your yarn can get through. Now, you can do as many wraps as you want, but they do tend to look neater, okay, and I'm going to use that term very carefully. If you use like 1 to 2 wraps, maybe 3 might be the most, okay? And well, I can already tell you I got a oops because I hadn't pulled my knot all the way up. There we go. I'm not going to edit this kind of stuff out. 1, 2, okay? So my thread's up. I'm going to wrap it once. I'm going to wrap it twice. And I'm going to go down right next to where it came down. You don't want to go down in the same hole because it's just going to pull your threads to the other side. Then I kind of like to hold it to guide it down because sometimes it will get caught on something and then you end up with a whole bunch of learns. Now, if you end up with a knot and you've got this thing here, I just tell myself that's padding, and I just make a little pile, and then I make French knots over it. And in fact, that is how a lot of my wildscapes started, is I kept making so many mistakes, and I had all these knots on top, and then I just kept stitching on top of them, and I started to get my first little hill, and that got me excited. So I'm going to come up. Now I could do it with just one, and it's a little bit smaller. Now I could do it with 3. Now there are people that make absolutely perfect, immaculate French knots. I'm not one of those. You don't have to pull them tight. You can pull them loose if you want and get a completely different effect. Now there are other knots. Some people find the colonial knot a little bit easier. I'm not going to show that in this video, but I will in another one. So see, that's a little looser. When I tend to get in the zone of making French knots and I wanted to do loose ones, I have to actually remind myself not to pull things too tight. But see, that gives you a completely different look, and you can mix and match. And it's not that you can't unpick a French knot, because you can, but the fact that it was such a pain to do it is, again, what got me doing one French knot on top of the other. Okay, so that's the French knot. Now I want to show you the bullion knot. These are bullion knots. They give great movement. A lot of people think they look like worms. That's fine. I love worms. You can use them in all kinds of ways. They look great if they're done in a narrow thread, and they also look really good narrow thread. By that I mean like a floss, and they look great in yarn. Here are some really skinny bullions done with, I think these are done with pearl cotton. You know, so it's a completely different look, and that's what's fun about stitch, right? Now the thing about any stitch is that you just have to be willing to put in the time to practice. Okay, so I get dog hairs on everything. I can't worry about it while I'm stitching. I go over everything with tweezers when I'm done. So the bullion knot, you're going to come up, and then you're going to decide how long you want to go. Now they do make a bullion needle, and a bullion needle is great if you are working with anything up to a pearl cotton. I couldn't even tell you what this is. It's bigger than, it's not a chenille needle. I don't know. Some of my favorite needles are ones that I found at the thrift store or that somebody's given me that have no labels on them. But I like fatter bullions, especially when I'm using my yarns. So I just, as long as my yarn will fit through it, and usually I'm making bullions with one that's even thicker. I just don't have it handy. So you just decide how long you want your bullion to be. I'm going to go down, and I'm going to come up right next to, not in the same hole, but I'm going to come up right next to it, but I'm not going to bring my needle all the way up. I can see I can wiggle it around. I'm going to pull it snug here, and then you're just going to wrap, kind of like a French knot. Just wrap. Now, these can be tricky if you want to make sure that you're going to get to the other end. But remember, I'm a recovering perfectionist, so I don't worry about it too much. Only a little bit. All right, so I'm going to wrap, wrap, wrap. And you do want them to be fairly snug, but not super tight, because you want to be able to pull it through. So see, I'm measuring how much I have on my needle with where my hole is. And if I pull that snug, which is what's going to happen, I'm going to be short. So I'm going to wrap some more. Okay, and if I push that down, I'm just about there. So for me, what I do, I always go 3 more beyond what I think I need. I'm going to push my needle through. Now, sometimes these can be tough to pull through. You can use pliers, or I use a little silicone thimble. It's just rubber, you know, to grip at the end, and I just pull my hoops, my turns through, whatever you want to call those loops through. All right, now while I'm holding on to this, and you can see I've got the bullion part here, I'm just going to slide them down. And then I'm just going to kind of rock it back and forth, tugging on this side until it gets down to that hole. Now I've got a little bit of an arch. That means that, and I don't know if you can see that here, but I'll show you. You know, I can wiggle it over. I could lay it down, tack it down that way. But I don't mind, because I usually pile my bullions up. You're going to go back down in the same hole you came up in. And here's the thing, okay? I'll often do that, and then I've got to kind of tug again and pull that side tight while I'm pulling it down. Now, what if you end up with a big old mess here at the end like that? It's an opportunity to say, okay, I made a mess. It's not nice and neat. Oh, darn. I'm just going to pull up my needle right next to there. And I'm going to do another bullion right next to it. It doesn't have to be a perfect thing. I guess I could have had that maybe. Oh, I guess could have zoomed in a little more. Let's do that. All right, so we're going to come up here, and I don't have a lot of yarn left, and that's okay. I'm just going to make a short one. I'm going to go down. I could probably make it a little bit longer. The thing is, if you're creating something that's going to be textural, like you're trying to do under the forest, okay, I'm going to come up right next to where that one was. It doesn't have to be one right after the other that's perfect. You can just fill it with more French knots, with beads, with rocks, with eyelash yarn. So I'm just wrapping like I would a French knot, lots and lots of wraps. I'm checking the distance, and you want to check it when you squish it down there. I'm pretty close. I'll go ahead and do a couple more just because. Pull it through. You don't have to worry if all this stuff gets tangled like that, it's fine. Just pull it through. So the first video that I watched on how to do a bullion knot had me doing something with like a loop up. The explanation was definitely not something for a beginner. This may not be something for a beginner. Let me know. Please leave any questions down in the comments and I will do my best. But that's a bullion, and so it just gives you some nice movement here. I need a fat needle, so I'm going to use something like this. I have no idea what size it is. Okay, this is the Drizzle Stitch, and it's what they call a cast-on stitch, but a very specific kind. And there are also, okay, so here's some drizzles that are done with pearl cotton, so you get a different twist. And like any stitch, the drizzle is going to be influenced by the size of your needle and the size of your fiber. So again, I'm still just using my fingering yarn because it's easy, it's right here. So for the drizzle stitch, you're going to end up pulling your thread out of your needle. So I doubled my yarn, put my knot in it, and now I will rethread it. And I couldn't tell you what size needle this is. This is going to make a short drizzle. If you want to make a long drizzle, you can do something with doll needles or tatting needles. They both work really well. So you're going to bring your needle up. Okay, and then you're going to bring your needle out of the yarn. Okay, and then you're going to put your needle back down in the fabric, and you might like to put a pincushion underneath if you're not having, mine's in a hoop stand right now. If it was flat, I could put a pincushion or a pillow underneath it to help hold my needle. And I'm going to cast on my stitches. And by casting on my stitches, that means I'm going to pull the yarn towards me. I'm going to take this finger, I'm going to go down and back up, down and back up, down and over. And you're just putting all those little loops over. And you're only doing this from the same side because you can maybe see how it's already starting to twist. And that's what makes the drizzle kind of fun. Now, if I had a much longer needle, which I can grab one of those in a minute, okay, I've got this little twist happening. I don't have that much needle left under there. This is really a lot more fun with a longer needle, but this shows you, you get different effects. If you can get, so this got a really big hole in the eye, so I could have a bulky yarn going through here and I would get a really interesting drizzle. When your drizzle is as tall as you want it, it can be however tall or short you want, you're going to rethread your needle. And I just leave a little loop. I find for me, I get tangled up if I pull too much through. So I just leave enough so it's not going to come undone. And you're going to pull that through. And now you have this little twisted, fun little thing. Now let me show you with a taller needle. I'm going to pull this up. And I'm going to use, that'll fit through here. This is a tatting needle. I think it's probably about 6 inches long. All right. And I'm just going to
cast this on. Got a fly came into the house. I haven't had one of those in the house for a while. He's going to buzz around. I guess if it's going to be something in the house, I'd rather it be a fly than a mosquito or a bee or a wasp. So this one's not going to be really long, so I didn't have a lot of yarn left, but it shows you as long as you can get your yarn or thread through. Now this is a much thinner needle, so if I was using embroidery floss, I would get a very thin, twisted kind of vine, but I want to show you how they look a little different as they get longer, hopefully. And something that I forgot to point out. One thing you want to make sure, I mean, you can make it, use up all your yarn on one needle because this is a long needle, but you want to make sure you leave enough yarn to pull through here and tie it off on the other side. So that's kind of how I gauge, and it's going to pull it snugger, so you're going to have a little bit of give in it. Get this one a little taller than the previous one. All right. Yeah, there's enough room. All right, so now it's a thinner needle. Let me take this off of here so I can show you the difference. I don't know if you can see enough, but I know. Let me get a piece of white paper. All right, this maybe will help. There's not a big difference, but this needle was definitely thinner, so the drizzle is more thin than the other one. That's my drizzle stitches. All right, now let's have a little more fun. A little fly running around here, and I am going to stick with my tatting needle. Okay. And this is going to be the cast on stitch. And I use the cast on stitch to build my vines. And by vines, I mean, so I use the cast on stitch for my vines. And again, depending on the yarn and the needle you use, this is a cast on stitch and this is a cast on stitch. So thicker yarns and a bigger needle is going to give you a different look than using a thinner one. And it's a very easy stitch. It's very similar to the drizzle stitch. So I doubled my yarn. I'm going to make my knot. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to take the yarn out of my needle. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put my needle right back down in there. Okay? Now I'm going to start like my drizzle. I'm going to cast it on, but now I'm going to change and I'm going to cast on with the other finger. And so I'm going to alternate back and forth, back and forth. And these are so much fun to do. They get really spindly if you do them with embroidery floss. I like them with the fingering yarn. And again, just changing the needle can get you something really interesting. You can experiment. Try this stitch, this yarn with 2 or 3 different needles. And to me, these look better the longer they get. I always like to get mine at least 3 inches on the needle if I can. Sometimes I'm using up scraps of yarn and I get little bits, and that's just a different look. It just kind of looks like something was just sprouting. But if you want a long vine, get yourself a doll needle or a tatting needle. And now, if you use something that is, so this yarn is about the same width, one strand of this about the same width as the needle. And that's kind of like my judgment. If I used a really thin yarn in a really thick needle, I would get a different look. Oh, and then sometimes you might forget, did I go 2 in one direction? Don't worry, it's just a blemish on the vine. It's not a big deal. All right, so you're just going to keep going like this. And again, you're going to check and make sure you always have enough yarn. But I've got more needle, so I'm just going to slide that down. And I'm going to cast on a little bit more. Now I have no idea what direction I stopped, so I might have a little bump, a little glitch in the vine. And I will show you a couple of ideas of that. Of course, you know me, I would always just put a French knot over it. Wouldn't matter. All right, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to rethread my needle. And then pull it through. And now, instead of getting a twist in just one direction, I get this curve. Isn't that cool? And so that gives you a completely different look. But wait, there's more. There's one more I want to show you. And it's made just like this, except, okay, so the next one I want to show you is the double cast on. All right, and it's going to give you something like this. Isn't this cool? And you can bunch them together like this. I love the effect of the woven picot stitch, and I hate making it. So this is my way of cheating it by doing the double cast on, which is much easier. So I'm going to take a long chunk of yarn, and I've got 2 needles that are about the same width. And the reason, you can do it with 1, but I'm kind of klutzy, so I like doing it with 2 because it helps keep things kind of steady. And you will see what I mean in a moment as to why that's important. Okay, so I'm going to make my knot, and let's just do this right over here next to the regular cast on. I'm going to pull this up, and again, these stitches, any of these where you have to have your needle back down in the thread, the drizzle, the cast on, and the double cast on, it's very helpful if you have a pincushion or a pillow. Because these needles are really long, I'm not going to worry about it because they can go all the way through. You want to come back down pretty close to your hole. I'm going to do these one at a time. Got one, and I'm going to put the other one in right next to it. And you can do it again with just 1 needle, but they tend to, because they're circular, they tend to slide around, so this is helpful. And again, the pillow or pincushion would be even more helpful. All right, so I've got my 2 needles, and I've got 2 threads. I'm going to separate them. Whoops, put my knot in the other end. Cut that. Okay, so I have a strand on each side. I've got a loose end on each side. Now I'm going to do a cast on. I'm going to go this side with this thread. I'm going to put that one down. I'm going to pick up the other one and do it there. And what this is going to do, instead of getting this curvy thing, it's going to stay straight. Now there are people that have done tutorials out there. I couldn't pull one out of my hat right now, but where they put a straw or some other kind of tube over the needles and do it. For me, I always get the yarn caught and things don't work out. So if you want to try it that way, go for it. Again, these are Susan, the non-perfectionist way of doing things. They work for me. If they don't work for you, that's okay. Oh, and I forgot I was going to show you something if your vines go wonky. Well, it works for anything that goes wonky. My fix for almost anything that goes wonky is a French knot. Almost always is a French knot, or maybe a French knot and a bead. And I'll show you what I mean. And you can make these tall, you can make these short. I'm going to try and make this one long so I can show you. Yeah, I've got a lot of yarn here. Show you some things you can do with it. And they get different looks if they're shorter or long. They just sort of like plants growing out in the forest, and that's what you want, right? Is you want that variety of textures in your wildscape. So this is something, once you get the hang of it, you can sit with the hoop or the fabric on your lap with a pillow or a pincushion underneath and just make them while you're watching TV. All right, that's going to be good enough. But again, you would always check to make sure you have enough yarn coming through here. And you can either thread each needle separately or you can put them all in the same needle. It doesn't matter. But I'm going to thread that one and pull it through. I'm going to thread this one and pull it through. And you can see now this one lays completely straight. Now you want to pull it really tight. You can get some interesting, it really looks like it's just kind of a brand new something that's growing, but I like to leave them more flat. So you've got your regular cast on and you've got your double cast on. Now what if this thing went kind of wonky and you had like a loose thread in the center here? Well, that's a great place just to tack it down. Put a French knot in the middle. Pull up another yarn right in the center of it. Same thing with these. You can make them really long and twist them. But any of these, you can, same thing with a drizzle. You know, you can tack the end of it down and you get a different look. Let's take this out of the hoop so you can see a little better here. All right, so from the side here, you've got your drizzle stitch, your double cast on, your single cast on, your French knots, and your bullions. You can tack them in interesting ways. You can fold them in half. You can bunch them together. This is much easier for me to bunch together than to do the woven picot stitch. Your mileage may vary. So there you have it. Those are my 5 most often used stitches in my wildscapes. I hope they give you some ideas of ways that you can create texture and movement in your own artwork. If you have any questions about the stitch, please, leave me a note in the comments and I will do my best to answer them for you. And there are lots of other videos out there that will give you the tutorials for the stitches. This is just what works for me.